When you step into the deep wilderness, even the strongest gear and years of experience can't stop nature when it turns violent. Grizzlies charge without warning, black bears strike after small mistakes, and the frozen landscape becomes a trap. From quiet trails to remote cabins, safety can disappear in an instant as storms rise, ice breaks, and predators appear unexpectedly. In this video, we'll explore 6 real bear encounters that flipped from calm to life-threatening. In June 2019, the Alaska interior felt wide and endless, with thick spruce forests rising along the Yukon-Tanana uplands. A small trail crew worked there during the short summer season, hired to clear an overgrown route that hikers and researchers depended on. Among the workers was Aaron Kessler, a man known across the region for his long years living deep in the bush. He had spent decades learning how wildlife moved across open tundra, river valleys, and dense brush. Many people believed he understood grizzlies better than anyone they knew. He had taught younger workers how to read tracks, how to stay calm in wild places, and how to react when animals wandered too close. Hard winters, long storms, and quiet days alone in forests had shaped him into someone steady and patient. The rest of the trail crew respected him and trusted his calm nature. They had come from different parts of Alaska, all familiar with harsh terrain and demanding labor, but none had the same background with large predators as Aaron. He had spent years observing their habits during salmon runs and berry seasons, keeping careful notes about what drew them close to human activity. Because of this past work, the crew felt safer with him nearby, even when the forest grew silent or when fresh tracks appeared on muddy paths. During the first few days on the job, the crew noticed small signs that a large animal had passed through the area. Broken branches hung loosely above narrow sections of the trail. Fresh claw marks lined tree trunks near the river. Now and then, distant huffs drifted across the forest, fading as quickly as they came. These were warnings that something powerful was moving close, but the workers continued their tasks, confident that their experience and awareness would keep them safe. Aaron stayed alert, watching patterns in the brush and the changes in the soft ground beneath their boots. On the 5th morning, the team split their tasks as usual. The sun rose early, lighting the tall grass and damp earth. Aaron moved ahead of the rest to remove several fallen trees near a narrow river crossing. The air smelled of wet soil and cold water, and the sound of flowing current filled the space around him. He carried basic tools, including a hatchet for cutting branches and clearing trunks. The forest around him felt still, but he remained mindful of the earlier signs the crew had noticed. Unseen by him, a massive male grizzly wandered close. The animal had struggled through a poor salmon season, and its hunger grew sharper each day. Dense brush hid its shape as it watched the trail, moving slowly and heavily. The bear had circled the area for some time, growing more desperate as it searched for food. As Aaron reached the fallen trees, the undergrowth rustled. Within seconds, the enormous grizzly surged forward without hesitation. The peaceful work site turned into chaos at the exact moment the animal charged, sending Aaron into a sudden fight for his life. The enormous grizzly burst from the thick brush with alarming speed, and Aaron barely raised his hatchet before the animal reached him. The impact knocked him to the damp ground, scattering tools across the narrow space. Sharp claws tore into his shoulder, ripping through fabric and scraping deeply across muscle. The weight of the bear pressed heavily against him, pinning him down as he struggled to push back. The river's steady noise mixed with harsh breaths and cracking vegetation, filling the air with the violent sounds of the attack. The bear struck again, its strength overwhelming. A heavy blow crushed several ribs, leaving Aaron gasping on the cold soil. His head slammed against the ground, sending sharp pain through his skull. Blood spread around him as he tried to lift his arm, but the animal continued its fierce assault. Every movement felt slow compared to the bear's power. The forest floor shook as the predator shifted its weight, focused entirely on the man beneath it. Far behind, the rest of the crew heard the rising commotion. They dropped their tools and ran toward the noise, stumbling over roots and loose branches as fear pushed them forward. When they reached the river crossing, They saw the massive shape towering over their companion. Their sudden arrival startled the grizzly enough to make it pull back from the injured man. The bear stood for a moment, muscles tense, then turned and disappeared into thick brush, leaving deep tracks in the soft ground. The workers rushed to Aaron's side. His clothing was torn, and large wounds covered his upper body. Cold air blew across his injured skin as the crew tried to slow the bleeding. Hours slowly passed as they fought to keep him alive while waiting for help. The long wait tested their resolve, and the early evening brought colder air, heightening the risk of hypothermia. When rescue finally reached them, Aaron was barely conscious but still breathing. He was taken away for treatment after suffering serious damage to his chest, head, and shoulder. His survival became known as one of the most violent grizzly attack recoveries in the region. The rest of the crew left the area shaken, carrying a new respect for the sudden risks hidden inside the Alaskan backcountry. In May 2023, a long passenger train wound its way through Fraser Canyon in British Columbia, cutting between towering cliffs and the fast-moving river far below. Among the travelers on board were many families, hikers and students enjoying the early summer air after a long winter. The train had left the coast that morning, passing through forests, tunnels, and narrow ridges. On board was the conductor, Daniel Walsh, a man who had worked rail lines for over 20 years and understood how unpredictable the canyon could be. Also riding that day was an off-duty wildlife officer named Nathan Pierce, traveling to visit relatives farther north. Nathan had spent years studying animal behavior in remote regions, learning how food sources, terrain, and weather change the actions of wild predators. Two teenagers, friends named Leo Turner and Ryan Baker, were also on the train. They were returning home from a school trip, both excited to see the dramatic canyon for the first time. Leo enjoyed outdoor photography, using small digital cameras to capture landscapes. At the same time, Ryan loved exploring new places and often pushed himself to get close to wildlife, not fully understanding the danger. Their teachers had warned them many times to keep their distance from wild animals, but the boys still felt drawn to anything unusual or exciting. As the morning sun warmed the canyon, the train suddenly slowed. A rock slide had dropped tons of stone across the tracks, sending dust rising into the air. The train eased to a stop, and Daniel walked through the cars to calm the passengers. Everyone was told to remain careful if they chose to step outside. People slowly exited, stretching their legs on a narrow strip of gravel that ran beside the train. The cliffs rose sharply on one side, with thick brush and scattered trees making a dense border against the track. None of the travelers noticed the dark shape moving at the edge of the tree line. A grain-conditioned black bear, used to seeking out human food, had wandered close to the tracks after catching the scent of snacks and leftovers carried by passengers. The animal's nose lifted, drawing in the smell of something easy to reach. When a passenger dropped a small bag of food waste near the gravel, the scent grew stronger, prompting the bear to go on a focused search. Leo and Ryan spotted the bear from the train windows and, without understanding the gravity of the situation, climbed down the embankment that bordered the canyon. They slipped into shrubs dotted with berries, landing on uneven stones as they tried to get a better look. The brush rustled loudly from their movement, drawing the bear's attention instantly. In seconds, the predator charged downhill. The ground shook with each step as it closed the distance. Ryan tried to move back up the slope, but the soil crumbled beneath him. The bear reached him first, slashing across his thigh with a heavy paw. Blood spread across the rocks while Leo froze in panic. Above them, chaos began to build. Panic spread as passengers scrambled toward the train, slipping on loose gravel while the canyon echoed with heavy thuds from the moving animal. Daniel pushed through the crowd, trying to keep people from running too close to the embankment. Nathan moved quickly as well, knowing the terrain worked against them. The narrow space between the train and the steep slope made movement slow and dangerous. Every sound bounced off the walls, hiding the bear's exact position and making it hard to track. Below the embankment, Leo knelt beside Ryan, trying to stop the bleeding with shaking hands. The cut was deep, and the rocks beneath them were slick with red. Ryan's strength faded fast as he tried to pull himself upright. The bear circled through the shrubs, pushing branches aside, its focus drawn toward the scent of blood and scattered food. Leo looked upward, hoping someone would reach them, but the climb back up was too steep for him to manage alone. Nathan reached the top of the slope, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the train. He moved carefully down the edge, testing each step. Daniel followed with an emergency horn used to warn workers along the tracks. They could not see the animal clearly, but they heard the brush crack under its weight as it shifted direction. Nathan released a strong blast of white spray that drifted between branches, while Daniel used the horn to add more confusion. The noise and haze mixed in the still air, forcing the bear to hesitate. The moment of pause gave Nathan enough time to reach the boys. He pulled Leo upward, and with effort, lifted Ryan to where Daniel could help drag him along the gravel strip. The bear circled again, but the strange sounds and bursts of air pushed it away from the embankment. It moved along the edge for several seconds before turning toward thicker brush. The canyon walls echoed with its movement until the sound faded into the distance. Back beside the train, passengers made space while Nathan checked Ryan's wound. Blood loss made him pale and weak, but he remained conscious as first aid supplies were brought forward. The rock slide still blocked the tracks, yet the crew focused on stabilizing him until help could arrive. Hours later, rescue teams reached the site. Ryan was carried out and taken for treatment, surviving the injury. The event left the passengers shaken, and officials later warned that even brief stops in wild canyons demanded caution, as food scents and unpredictable terrain could turn a delay into a dangerous encounter. In September 2025, deep inside the forests of Ussuri Krai in eastern Russia, two field biologists, Sergei Antonov and Natalia Sokolova, settled into a small wooden cabin to begin a month-long research project. Sergei, 38, had spent most of his adult life studying rare plants that survived only in remote environments. He was known for his calm nature, steady hands, and careful work habits. His passion for conservation had grown during his years at a botanical institute, where he spent countless hours preserving fragile seeds collected from harsh regions. Natalia, 34, had followed a similar path, though her interests centered on soil chemistry and the impact of changing weather on nutrient cycles. She had worked in several rugged areas before, from mountain slopes to coastal zones. She and Sergei had partnered on several projects, forming a team known for patience, precision, and a willingness to live far away from towns for long periods. Both felt comfortable in the wild, carrying notebooks, sampling kits, and basic tools to maintain their small shelter. The season had been dry, far drier than usual for the region. Streams shrank, plants wilted, and animals wandered farther than normal in search of food. Although Sergei and Natalia understood the risks of working in a forest known for large predators, they believed the cabin would provide enough safety. They stored canned food, bread, and chocolate inside the structure, stacking supplies along one wall. On the first evening, rain clouds gathered, and strong winds swept through the tall trees surrounding the site. As night settled, the storm grew louder. The wind pushed against the walls, rattling loose boards, while heavy rain hit the roof in uneven bursts. Inside, Natalia reviewed samples collected earlier that day, while Sergei sorted notebooks and planned the next morning's tasks. Thunder rolled through the valley, shaking the small cabin and making the lantern light flicker. Far beyond the trees, a massive male Russian grizzly bear moved through the darkness. Hunger had driven it closer to human areas in recent weeks. The dry summer had limited natural food sources, leaving the animal weak but determined. The strong scent of canned goods and sweets drifted through the air, guiding the bear toward the isolated structure. The storm masked its heavy footsteps as it searched for the source. Around midnight, the bear approached the cabin door. The animal's weight pressed against the wood, which had softened from years of harsh weather. Sergei heard a strange noise, a slow creak followed by a sudden crack. His heartbeat quickened as he turned toward the entrance. The weakened door frame strained under the pressure, the hinges shaking as another heavy shove hit the structure. The final break came fast. The bear pushed through, splintering the wood and forcing part of the wall inward. Sergei grabbed a wooden chair to block the opening, his body tense as the massive shape forced its way inside. The storm outside roared, but the danger within the cabin grew even louder. The wooden chair in Sergei's hands barely slowed the bear as it forced itself deeper into the cabin. The impact knocked him backward, sending him across scattered supplies. The bear's massive paw struck him with devastating force, tearing through fabric and skin. Natalia covered her head as the collapsing wall sent tools, containers, and loose boards crashing across the floor. The storm outside drowned nearly every sound, but inside the small room, the violence felt endless. Sergei struggled to rise, but the bear's weight pushed him down again. Deep wounds opened across his chest and neck as the animal pressed forward. Natalia crawled behind a heavy table, shaking and bleeding from small cuts. She threw anything she could reach toward the bear, from boots to metal pans, hoping to draw its attention away from Sergei for even a moment. The powerful animal barely reacted, focused entirely on the movement in front of it as it continued to attack with brutal strength. Minutes passed like hours as the storm raged and the bear tore through the weakened cabin. The walls shook, more boards cracked, and supplies spilled across the uneven floor. Sergei's breathing slowed. The injuries were too severe for him to recover. Natalia watched in horror as the bear finally stepped back, its hunger momentarily satisfied. It sniffed the air, knocked over more equipment, and then turned toward the broken doorway. Wind and snow swept inside as the massive figure retreated into the darkness. Silence settled over the ruined cabin, broken only by the storm outside and Natalia's unsteady breaths. She crawled toward Sergei, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. It was clear he had succumbed to blood loss long before the bear left. The weight of the night settled heavily on her shoulders as she tried to gather her strength. Hours later, faint engine sounds echoed through the forest. Morning patrol teams moved along their route, checking remote shelters after the severe weather. When the rangers reached the site, they found the shattered entrance, overturned supplies, and Natalia barely conscious, bruised, freezing, and covered in debris. She pointed weakly towards Sergei, her expression empty from exhaustion and shock. Rangers carried her to safety and secured the area, marking fresh tracks in the snow and inspecting the damage. The loss weighed heavily on everyone who arrived at the scene. Natalia survived, but the night left deep scars that extended far beyond the physical injuries. The broken cabin stood as a stark reminder of how quickly danger rises in the wilderness and how a single mistake in food storage can invite a deadly encounter in the remote forests of Ussuri-Krai. In May 2014, along the rugged Kenai coast of Alaska, marine biologist Carla Vance prepared for another demanding field day. She had spent years studying coastal ecosystems, drifting ice, and the movement of aquatic animals. Her work often placed her in difficult terrain, guiding younger scientists through harsh and unpredictable environments. Carla was known for her steady focus and her ability to stay calm when conditions changed quickly. Her teammates, Daniel Brooks and Henry Cole, trusted her judgment, relying on her to keep their small research group organized during long seasons on the coast. The trio had been working near a tidewater glacier, collecting data on melting patterns and monitoring seal populations. Their equipment included cameras, measuring tools, and a drone used to track ice changes from above. During a strong gust the previous day, the drone lost power and crashed near a low-tide ice lagoon. Retrieving it meant crossing shifting flows and frozen pools, but the device stored important readings they needed to finish their work. The morning was cold, with gray clouds stretching across the coastline. Thin sheets of ice floated gently, tipping each time the tide pulled or pushed. Carla led the way, using a long pole to test the strength of each floe before stepping onto it. Daniel followed with a pack of recovery gear, and Henry carried a first aid kit, carefully keeping pace. The lagoon walls rose sharply around them, blocking most radio signals and creating a quiet, echoing chamber where every crack and groan of the ice seemed louder. As they moved deeper into the lagoon, they noticed dark shapes ahead, One iceberg leaned sharply, revealing scraped marks along its edge. Carla scanned the area, recognizing the signs of recent animal activity. Before she could warn the others, a massive shape burst from behind the tilted ice block. A huge grizzly rose from a partially buried whale carcass, defending the food it had claimed. Its sudden appearance sent shock through the group. The bear's size alone showed how strong and dangerous it was. Before anyone could react, the glacier behind them released a violent calving event. A thunderous crack boomed across the lagoon as a giant sheet of ice broke off and slammed into the water. Waves rushed outward, shaking every floe beneath their boots. The shock startled the bear, pushing it into a full charge toward the team. Daniel stepped back in panic, placing his weight on a thin patch of ice. It shattered instantly, sending him crashing into freezing water. His ankle twisted sharply as he dropped, leaving him unable to stand. Carla reached him without hesitation, pulling him onto a spinning floe as the water churned around them. The rising tide pushed ice slabs closer together, cutting off clear paths. Henry struggled to find a steady footing, while the bear closed the distance across the unstable lagoon. Carla realized the danger was only beginning. Carla steadied herself on the shifting floe, knowing the next moments would decide whether they survived the shrinking lagoon. Daniel lay trembling beside her, unable to move his injured leg, while Henry struggled to balance on another slab as the cold water surged around his boots. The bear advanced without hesitation, climbing over broken ice with powerful limbs. Each step sent small pieces drifting away, sealing off any chance of a quick escape. The tide continued to rise, pushing the ice chunks together in unpredictable patterns. Carla watched the bear scan their positions, its focus now fully locked on the only stable place holding two humans. The whale's remains behind it were no longer enough to keep its attention. Hunger, stress, and the violent noise from the calving had combined into one dangerous force. Carla looked across the lagoon and measured the layout in her mind. One larger floe sat several meters away, close to a cluster of smaller slabs that could lead toward a wider patch of hard ice. If she moved now, the bear might follow her instead of charging directly at Daniel. She pressed her boots into the slippery surface, braced her weight, and prepared to leap. The first jump carried her onto a tilted floe that rocked wildly under her landing. She kept low, pushing forward before the motion could throw her off balance. The bear changed direction instantly, leaving Daniel and crossing the ice toward her. Its claws cracked frozen layers, its heavy frame shaking every floe it touched. Carla forced herself onward, reaching the cluster she had spotted earlier. She moved carefully but quickly, aware that one mistake could drop her into freezing water that would sap her strength in seconds. Behind her, Henry dragged Daniel farther onto the small platform, trying to keep him still as the ice around them groaned. The bear's attention stayed mostly on Carla, driven by motion and instinct. She reached the larger floe and steadied herself, turning just long enough to see how close the animal had come. It was only a few body lengths away. A deep vibration rolled through the lagoon as the tide lifted the floes even higher. The movement slowed the bear's steps, buying Carla a few precious moments. She used the time to guide herself toward the wider patch of ice that bordered the lagoon wall. It took several careful moves, each one a measured shift across slick surfaces. Her gloves grew stiff from the cold, and her breathing became harsh in the frozen air. The rising water finally forced the bear to pause, distracted by shifting chunks that no longer supported its full weight. It retreated slightly, climbing onto a thicker slab near the whale carcass. Carla reached the firmer ice at last, collapsing to her knees as her legs shook from effort and fear. With the immediate danger reduced, Henry pulled Daniel across the narrow pieces until they reached the edge, where Carla waited. The three of them stayed close together, letting the tide push the remaining floes outward. The bear did not pursue them further, returning instead to the remains it had been guarding. Hours later, as the tide lowered and the wind weakened, they made their way out of the lagoon. Daniel's injury slowed their progress, but they reached safer ground before darkness settled. Rescue crews found them the next morning after they reached an open channel where a weak radio signal carried through. In the aftermath, Carla and her team understood how quickly the subarctic region of Alaska could turn a research trip into a life-threatening struggle. The memory of the shrinking ice, the charging bear, and the desperate jumps stayed with them long after they returned to safety. They continued their work, but with a deeper respect for the unpredictable forces of the Kenai coast. In July 2024, Ryan Kim traveled alone through the Kodiak archipelago, hoping to enjoy a short kayak journey across quiet coastal passages. He was 40 years old, known among friends for his love of long paddling trips and simple outdoor camps. Ryan worked as a physical therapist in Washington, spending most of his free time practicing safe wilderness travel. He often trained on cold beaches, learning how to move fast in rough water and harsh wind. These skills made him feel prepared for most challenges, and this trip was meant to be a short adventure between long work weeks. He planned to cross a sheltered channel, camp for one night, and return the following morning. Ryan had always been careful with food storage, but he also enjoyed trying new camp meals. While packing for this trip, he brought smoked fish from a local market, wanting to taste something special while resting by the water. He knew Kodiak bears lived throughout the islands, yet he trusted his habits and believed he could manage his camp safely. The pebbled beaches scattered across the area seemed peaceful to him, and the cold air of midsummer kept insects away, making it a comfortable place to rest. Late in the evening, Ryan found a small beach shaped like a shallow bowl of stones. A thin line of spruce trees stood behind it, and narrow bear trails ran between their trunks. He unloaded his gear from the kayak, placing dry bags along the shore while the tide pushed slow waves onto the rocks. The sky carried a soft orange glow as he set up his tent and prepared his meal. His hands were stiff from paddling, and when he reached for one of the food bags, it slipped from his grasp. The smoked fish tumbled across the stones and landed near one of the faint trails. At first, Ryan thought nothing of it. He reached down to pick up the bag, unaware that the smell traveled easily through the still evening air. The soft wind drifted through the trees, carrying the scent deeper into the brush above camp. The quiet beach felt calm, and Ryan continued preparing his simple meal, believing he would soon fall asleep and leave early the next day. Without warning, a massive Kodiak bear burst from the trail, its weight shaking loose stones across the ground. Ryan barely had time to turn before the animal charged, drawn straight to the fish. The bear struck with overwhelming force, knocking Ryan backward into the cold water. He felt a deep, tearing pain as claws raked across his forearm, opening a long wound that bled quickly in the frigid surf. His kayak bounced against the stones as the bear smashed it, crushing the thin frame and scattering gear into the tide. Hypothermia set in fast, the cold water draining strength from Ryan's limbs. Waves pushed him against the rocks while he struggled to stay afloat, the bear pacing only a short distance away. With fading strength, Ryan pulled himself onto a jagged boulder near the shore, clutching a kayak paddle to keep the bear away. The nightmare had only begun. Ryan gripped the paddle with stiff fingers as the large bear paced along the uneven stones below the boulder. The cold water ran off his clothes in steady streams, and each breath grew weaker as the temperature drained his energy. The sharp rock beneath him cut into his legs, but he forced himself to stay balanced. The bear tested the space by pushing against loose stones, its heavy body shifting the ground with each movement. Ryan felt trapped above the tide, unable to move toward the broken kayak or the scattered supplies. The beach grew darker as clouds stretched across the sky, and the fading light made every moment feel heavier. The bear moved around the boulder several times, sometimes rising onto its hind legs to sniff the air, sometimes lowering its head toward the splintered kayak remains. It seemed unsure whether to climb or stay near the shore. Ryan knew that any slip could send him back into the water, where the cold would overcome him completely. His injured arm throbbed as blood mixed with seawater, forming dark streaks across his skin. The long hours on the rock turned into a slow struggle against numbness. The wind pushed waves across the beach, soaking the edges of the stones and making the footing even more dangerous. The bear continued to linger, exploring the edges of the boulder and pushing its paws against the rock face as if testing Ryan's position. The force of each push made small pieces of stone fall toward the water. Ryan braced himself with the paddle, trying to keep a distance between the two bodies. His shoes slipped several times, each time sending a jolt of fear through his chest. The tides rose and fell slightly as time passed, and the cold waves lapped at the lower part of the boulder. His sense of time faded, replaced only by the need to stay awake in the growing chill. Eventually, the bear wandered toward the scattered pieces of gear, pushing through bags and crushed equipment. It circled the beach, pausing often to look back at Ryan. Hunger and interest held the animal in place. Each time it approached the rock again, Ryan lifted the paddle, his arm shaking from fatigue. His breath came in shallow bursts, his teeth clattering from the cold. Far out in the water, the wind shifted, carrying distant engine sounds that Ryan could barely recognize. The bear turned its head toward the noise but remained on the beach, refusing to leave the area entirely. The faint shape of a fishing vessel slowly appeared through the moving waves. Its light cut across the surface, barely visible against the dark horizon. As it bounced in the swells, the noise grew louder. The bear finally backed away from the boulder, unsettled by the unfamiliar sound. It walked toward the tree line, pausing once before fading into the brush. Ryan stayed frozen in place, unsure if the danger had truly passed. The cold pressed deeper into his limbs, slowing every movement he tried to make. The vessel approached the beach, and crew members spotted the broken kayak and Ryan's trembling figure on the boulder. They steered closer, throwing a line toward the rock. Ryan could barely move, but his remaining strength allowed him to hold on as they pulled him toward safety. Once on board, he collapsed in exhaustion. His injured arm and freezing body showed clear signs of shock. He survived, but the long night on the Kodiak coast left him changed. The memory of the massive bear, the cold water, and the crushing isolation stayed with him long after he healed. Ryan later understood that even skilled adventurers could face moments where nature's strength outweighed human preparation. The Kodiak archipelago, with its harsh waters and powerful wildlife, reminded him that every decision carried weight. The boulder, the ruined kayak, and the long hours trapped above the tide became a lasting reminder of how quickly a calm evening could turn into a struggle to stay alive. March 2024 settled over Svalbard with deep cold and endless stretches of white that rolled across the Arctic plateau. A small research team moved through this frozen landscape inside a snowcat, a heavy vehicle built to cross ice and snow. The group was focused on long-term studies of permafrost and glacial change, work that demanded careful travel through one of the harshest environments on Earth. The driver, Henrik Larsson, had spent years navigating polar terrain and understood the dangers that could rise without warning. He knew how fast storms could form and how easily the ice could shift beneath metal tracks. His steady hands and calm nature made him the best person to guide the team through the unstable tundra. Another key member, Anna Fisher, worked as a field specialist, collecting ground samples and monitoring temperature changes. She had trained for many seasons in remote Arctic stations and respected the wildlife that lived in these isolated regions. Her focus helped the group stay organized during long hours in the cold. The rest of the team prepared equipment and recorded readings as they traveled, their attention fixed on the ice ahead. The day began quietly, but the weather changed fast. Heavy wind swept over the plateau, carrying stinging snow that made it hard to see more than a short distance. The sky turned gray as thick clouds dropped low across the ridges. Henrik slowed the snowcat as visibility faded, guiding the machine toward a known path near a raised slope. Ice groaned under the weight of the vehicle, and the tracks occasionally slipped on the uneven surface. As they approached the ridge, the wind grew stronger, shaking the snowcat and pushing loose snow across the windows. The team checked supplies and secured gear, while the engine hummed in steady rhythm. Cold air seeped through the sealed frame, adding to the sense of isolation. The tundra felt empty, but the Arctic held predators that moved silently through storms. Without warning, The quiet was shattered by a heavy impact. A massive polar bear, drawn by the mixed scent of fuel and stored food, charged from the side of the ridge. Its huge shoulder slammed into the snowcat, making the entire vehicle jolt sideways. Henrik gripped the controls as snow sprayed across the windshield. The bear reared up, its claws scraping metal and leaving deep dents along the side panel. The reinforced window cracked under a powerful strike, sending pieces of brittle material scattering across the dashboard. Henrik tried to accelerate, but the icy surface offered almost no grip, causing the tracks to spin in place. Inside the snowcat, tension rose with each blow. The storm masked much of the outside world, adding to the fear of not knowing what direction the bear might attack from next. Anna moved toward the door, hoping to push the animal back long enough for Henrik to gain traction. The moment she opened it, the bear swiped across her arm, leaving deep cuts and stunning pain that shot through her wrist. The attack had only begun, and the storm trapped them on the ridge. The brutal strike sent Anna stumbling back into the snowcat, her injured arm pressed against her chest as she tried to steady herself. Sharp pain pulsed through the deep cuts, and her wrist throbbed from the force of the blow. Henrik pulled the door shut while the heavy frame vibrated from the bear's weight. Snow rattled against the cracked window as the storm gusts swept across the ridge, creating a wall of white that hid everything beyond a few feet. The polar bear stayed close, moving around the snowcat with slow, powerful steps. Its massive body blocked what little light seeped through the storm. Each time it leaned into the vehicle, the metal frame complained under the pressure. The walls shook as the animal pressed its claws deep into the insulation, tearing long strips of material free. Equipment toppled from shelves inside, scattering across the floor with loud thuds that mixed with the wind's howl. The team rushed to brace loose items, using anything available to reinforce the damaged side. Anna sat near the back, holding her wounded arm, while another member wrapped a layer of cloth around the cuts to slow the bleeding. Her breath came in short bursts as she fought the freezing air that seeped through the torn insulation. The inside temperature dropped quickly, making every second feel heavier. One of the researchers grabbed a flare and ignited it near a broken vent. The bright red glow spread across the interior and lit the bear's shadow outside. The predator reacted with a sudden swing, smashing a panel above the tracks and sending a shower of loose metal onto the floor. Henrik revved the engine to create as much noise as possible, hoping the combined light and sound would slow the animal's advance. For a moment, the predator paused. Its heavy breathing carried through the cracked frame, and its large paws scraped the snow near the damaged door. The storm continued to hammer the ridge, boxing the snowcat between violent wind on one side and relentless force on the other. Ice shifted beneath the tracks, making the vehicle tilt slightly, and Henrik fought to keep it balanced. Another swipe hit the rear corner, shaking the entire vehicle. The team braced themselves while the equipment rolled from side to side. The flare burned lower, but its smoke and flicker helped distract the bear. The animal moved along the opposite side, leaving claw marks across the metal and forcing the team to shift their weight to counter the movement. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. The storm thickened, then gradually began to ease. The wind softened enough for Henrik to see a faint outline of the ridge behind the bear. As the flare dimmed, the predator finally moved away from the snowcat, retreating across the uneven ground with heavy steps that faded into the swirling white. Henrik waited until the shape fully disappeared before attempting to drive. The tracks gripped better now that the wind no longer blasted loose snow across the surface. The snowcat crawled forward at a slow, careful pace, each bump sending shocks through the damaged frame. By the time they reached the secure base, the storm had passed. Anna was rushed inside for treatment, her arm wrapped and supported as warm air eased her shivering. The battered snowcat stood outside, covered in claw marks and torn insulation. The team remained shaken, fully aware that even strong machines offered limited protection in the far north. The ridge became a reminder of how quickly the Arctic could turn violent, leaving them grateful to have survived a predator built for this unforgiving land.